Denver International Airport was just waking up to the chilled hush of a winter morning. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, luggage wheels clicked on cold tiles, and a line of sleepy travelers shuffled through security. No one expected the silence to be shattered. It happened the moment a man in a black cassock stepped into the screening area, a silver crucifix resting gently on his chest. He was calm, almost invisible among the crowd. But the 6 police K9s stationed nearby sensed him instantly. Ranger, the lead German shepherd, froze. His ears shot up. His breath shortened. Then, a single bark, sharp, echoing, followed by another and another. Within seconds, all 6 K9s lunged forward, straining against their handlers, barking with a frantic urgency no one had ever heard from them. Travelers gasped. Officers shouted for space. The man in the cassock, Father Thomas Mitchell, 62, stood stunned, his hands trembling as the dogs encircled him. "Hold your dogs," someone yelled. "They've never acted like this," an officer responded. But the K9s weren't attacking. They were warning. And when emergency medics rushed over minutes later, the truth that unfolded would leave the entire airport frozen in disbelief. Father Thomas Mitchell had always moved through the world quietly. He wasn't the kind of priest who commanded attention or filled rooms with grand gestures. Instead, he carried a gentle presence, the kind forged through decades of listening more than speaking, of offering comfort in small, unnoticed ways. That morning, he arrived at Denver Airport early, luggage in hand, a folded letter tucked inside his coat. He was scheduled to fly to Albuquerque for a short pastoral assignment. A snowstorm had delayed some flights, but the terminal still buzzed with its usual rhythm. Impatient sighs, rolling suitcases, the distant whir of coffee machines. Father Thomas felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the kind he blamed on poor sleep after an early morning mass. At 62, fatigue visited him often. Still, he walked with purpose, smiling politely at the TSA officers as he entered the security line. Across the hall, Unit Echo 7, the K9 security team, was preparing for their rotation. 6 dogs, Ranger, Bolt, Shadow, Ember, Duke, and Arrow. Each stood tall beside their handlers. They were seasoned professionals, trained to detect explosives, narcotics, chemical traces, anything that threatened civilian safety. Their reputation was flawless. Their discipline, unshakable. Ranger, the eldest and most experienced, scanned the crowd with calm, steady eyes. He rarely reacted, unless absolutely necessary. His handler, Officer Delgado, trusted him with his life. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Just another morning, a toddler cried. A businessman complained about delays. A couple argued softly over a boarding pass. And then, Father Thomas stepped into view. Ranger's head snapped toward him with a suddenness that made Delgado frown. The dog's breath hitched. His muscles tightened. Something deep, instinctive, shifted inside him, as though a silent alarm had been triggered beneath his ribs. Delgado whispered, "What is it, boy?" But Ranger didn't blink, didn't look away. His eyes locked onto the priest's chest, precisely over the region where a human heart beats. Bolt, standing beside him, began to tremble. Shadow lifted his nose, sniffing sharply. A chain reaction spread among the K9s, invisible yet electric. Father Thomas had no idea. He simply shuffled forward, adjusting the strap of his small suitcase, unaware that 6 sets of eyes were tracking him with laser focus. A moment before everything erupted, a quietly unsettling calm hung in the air, a silence so thin it felt ready to tear. And then it did. Ranger moved first. It wasn't dramatic at the beginning, just a slow, deliberate step forward. His claws clicked lightly against the tile, a sound so subtle that most travelers didn't even hear it. But Officer Delgado did. He felt the leash tighten, felt the dog's chest expand with a deep, alert breath. Then, Ranger's ears locked into a rigid forward tilt. His pupils narrowed, analyzing something no human eye could see. "Easy, Ranger," Delgado murmured, though he already sensed there was nothing easy about this moment. Beside him, Bolt, the wiry Belgian Malinois, shifted his weight, tail stiffening like a drawn bowstring. Bolt was the excitable one of the unit, always ready before being asked. But this wasn't excitement. This was fear laced with urgency. Shadow, usually slow and thoughtful, lowered his head until his nose brushed the floor, inhaling sharply as though trying to trace an invisible trail leading straight to Father Thomas. Ember, the only female in the group, let out a quiet, trembling whine. Her brown eyes glimmered with confusion, her body torn between obedience to her handler and something deeper, something instinctive. Duke and Arrow, the two youngest in the team, stepped closer to Ranger with barely controlled tension flickering through their muscles. Their shoulders rose and fell with each breath, sinking like a single heartbeat. For the first time in years, all 6 canines were aligned in the same silent alarm. Their handlers exchanged worried looks. "What the hell is going on?" Officer Reed whispered. "They're reacting to something," Officer Daniels replied. "But it's not the crowd." Ranger's gaze finally lifted, not scanning, not searching, but pointing, like a compass needle locking onto its true north. He stared directly at Father Thomas. Not at his face, not at his suitcase, but at his chest, slightly left of center, the spot where the heart beats. Father Thomas felt it, even before he understood it. A strange prickling sensation touched the back of his neck, a subtle weight settling on his chest as if someone were gently pressing the heel of their hand there. He slowed his steps, puzzled, his breathing shallow. From across the room, he noticed the first dog looking at him. Then the second, then all 6. Their eyes weren't angry. They weren't predatory. They were pleading. A flicker of unease crossed his gentle features. He pressed his palm to his chest, feeling a faint flutter he'd dismissed for weeks. A traveler behind him chuckled nervously. "Guess they don't like priests," he joked. But no dog growled. No dog bared teeth. Instead, 6 chests expanded in unison, 6 deep breaths drawn like a single warning. And in that suspended moment, the air felt charged with something unspoken, ancient, and raw. The storm inside the dogs hadn't exploded yet. But the instincts that would soon save a life had just awakened. It began with a tremor, not in the floor, not in the air, but in Ranger's body. A subtle shiver rolled along his spine, making his fur lift in a rippling wave. Officer Delgado felt it through the leash, a vibration so slight it might have been missed by anyone else. But Delgado had worked with Ranger for 7 years. He knew that tremor. It meant one thing. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Ranger leaned forward, nostrils flaring. He inhaled again and again, sharp, short breaths, as if trying to pinpoint an odor hidden deep beneath layers of human scent, airport perfume, and recycled air. Then his head jerked upward. A low, guttural sound rumbled in his throat. Not aggression, not fear, warning. Delgado stiffened. "Ranger, talk to me. What are you sensing?" But before he could process the question, Bolt, ever reactive, let out a sudden bark that cracked through the security hall like a gunshot. Travelers gasped, turning instinctively. A mother held her child closer. A businessman dropped his coffee. Father Thomas froze where he stood. His eyes, gentle and tired, widened at the sudden chaos. He clutched his suitcase with both hands, though his grip seemed weak. His left shoulder sagged, almost imperceptibly. And when he tried to straighten, a faint grimace of pain flickered across his face. Shadow caught the expression instantly. He stepped forward, tail stiff, letting out a sharp whine, the kind he only made when detecting biological distress. Officers from the medical response team had heard it before during training drills. But to hear it now, in a public airport, was unnerving. Bolt barked again, this time louder. Not at Thomas, but toward Thomas. A direct line. "What is he doing?" someone murmured. "Are they alerting on him?" another whispered, stepping back. Father Thomas attempted a reassuring smile, but the corners of his lips trembled. "I'm fine," he said softly. "Just a bit tired." But his voice lacked strength, and Ranger didn't believe him. The lead canine took 3 deliberate steps forward, pulling Delgado several feet. His paws planted firmly. His eyes locked onto the exact area of the priest's chest again, the same spot as before. Then, as if struck by an invisible signal, all 6 dogs reacted simultaneously. Ember let out a rising howl. Arrow crouched low, ears pinned. Duke began pacing in a tight circle. Bolt barked with frantic desperation. Shadow whined louder, pawing the floor. And Ranger, calm, disciplined Ranger, opened his jaws and barked a powerful, echoing command that shook the entire hall. It was no longer a warning. It was a plea no human yet understood. But in less than 5 minutes, everyone would. The airport security hall shifted in an instant. Where moments earlier there had been idle chatter, rolling luggage, and low murmurs, now there was a sharp tension hanging in the air, tight, electric, almost metallic. The 6 canines had crossed an invisible threshold, and every passenger around them sensed it. Ranger barked again, deeper, louder, with a resonance that made nearby windows vibrate faintly. His front paws pushed hard against the floor as he strained toward Father Thomas. "Delgado! Pull him back!" an officer shouted. "I'm trying!" Delgado yelled back, digging his boots into the tile. But Ranger wasn't attacking. He was trying to reach the priest, not leap at him. His posture wasn't hostile. It was urgent. Bolt lunged next, his body a blur of muscle and instinct. Officer Reed wrapped both arms around the leash as Bolt dragged him forward several feet. Ember followed, not barking now, but whining with a haunting rising pitch, as if begging someone to listen. Father Thomas felt his breath hitch, not from fear, but from something inside his chest tightening, like a fist closing around his heart. "I assure you," he said weakly, "there must be some misunderstanding." But the misunderstanding wasn't coming from the dogs. Shadow crept low, nose pointed directly at the priest's chest, inhaling rapidly. Duke circled closer, tail stiff and eyes locked like a sniper's sight. Arrow's body shook with tension, the kind that precedes either a sprint or a scream. Passengers began backing away, forming a widening ring around the scene. "They're alerting on him for something," a traveler muttered. "No way it's explosives," another whispered. "Maybe he's hiding something?" "He's a priest, dude!" "Dogs don't lie," a TSA officer raised his voice. "Sir, please step back slowly." Delgado glanced at the priest, saw his pallor, the sweat forming at his temples, the slight sway in his posture. Something clicked in the officer's mind. Fear? No. Recognition. He'd seen this once before, during a medical training drill with K9s. Ranger didn't bark like this at drugs or explosives or suspicious luggage. He barked like this when a person's body chemistry shifted dangerously. Delgado's voice cracked as he shouted, "Someone call medical, now!" But Ranger didn't wait for help. With a sudden, desperate tug, he broke formation and surged toward the priest again, the leash snapping taut, muscles straining, eyes locked with an intensity that made even the bravest passengers fall silent. And in that split second, everyone understood. The dogs weren't warning about Father Thomas. They were warning for him. Bolt was the first to snap the boundary of control completely. In a sudden burst of instinct, he reared up on his hind legs, barking so violently that Officer Reed lost his grip for a fraction of a second. The Malinois crashed back to the floor, claws scraping against the smooth tiles, as he dragged Reed several inches toward Father Thomas. Shadow followed, lowering into a full sprint stance, muscles coiled, breath rapid, eyes fixed with unblinking focus. Ranger emitted a deep, trembling growl that vibrated through Delgado's arm like a current. It wasn't a threat. It was desperation, the way a dog growls when someone he loves is about to collapse. "Back up, everyone, back up!" TSA officers shouted as they widened the perimeter. But the crowd didn't need instructions. The look in those canines' eyes, wild, urgent, primal, sent a chill through every witness. Father Thomas lifted a hand, as if to calm them. But his fingers trembled. His breathing had changed, shallow, uneven, catching in the middle as though something inside him refused to expand. I don't understand," he whispered. And then the pain hit. A flash of agony, sharp, stabbing, shot across the left side of his chest. His eyes fluttered. His knees softened. Ranger exploded forward. Delgado nearly fell, trying to hold him back. "Ranger, no!" he yelled, his voice cracking with fear. But Ranger wasn't trying to attack. He was trying to reach. Ember began barking, a high-pitched, frantic cry that the handlers had heard only once before, during a cardiac emergency drill. Bolt barked back at her, the two dogs creating a frantic rhythm that filled the hall with a terrifying urgency. Passengers looked from the priest to the dogs and back again, confusion twisting into realization. "Something's wrong with him," someone murmured. "He doesn't look good." "Is he having a heart attack?" Father Thomas staggered. His suitcase slipped from his hand and toppled to the floor with a dull thud. The sound echoed unnaturally loud. Shadow barked, one single, piercing bark, then began pawing at the ground. The same motion he used to alert paramedics during search and rescue simulations. Delgado's expression changed instantly. "He's crashing," he whispered. "Medical team, now!" another officer yelled. But the dogs didn't wait. All six pulled forward in unison, forming a half circle around the priest, not to corner him, but to shield him, to push him back from the security line, to keep him upright. It was chaos. It was instinct. It was a warning that could no longer be ignored. And just as Father Thomas's vision began to blur, Ranger barked one last time. A bark that hollowed the entire terminal. "He's dying," not in words, but in a language older than language itself. The moment Father Thomas's knees buckled, everything unraveled. Officer Delgado lunged forward, one hand gripping Ranger's leash, the other reaching for the priest. But the dogs reacted faster than any human could. Shadow darted in first, pressing his body against the priest's leg to keep him from collapsing completely. Ember slid in on the other side, nudging upward with her shoulder, emitting soft but urgent whines, as if pleading with him to stay awake. "Hold on, Father," someone shouted. But Father Thomas could barely hear the voices anymore. The world had faded into muffled echoes, like he was underwater. The bright neon lights above him blurred into long white streaks. His fingers tingled. His lips felt numb. A cold wave spread across his back. Bolt barked so rapidly that Reed had to brace himself to keep the Malinois from breaking free entirely. The bark wasn't rhythmic anymore. It was frantic, uneven, almost panicked. Ranger, eyes wide with something close to anguish, pressed forward hard enough to force Delgado 2 full steps closer to the priest. The shepherd's pupils were blown, his ears pinned back. A visual sign canine handlers recognized instantly. He believed the man was seconds from collapsing. "Get the medical cart here right now!" a TSA supervisor shouted into her radio. But time was slipping. Passengers stepped back in terror and awe, making room without needing to be told. Some clasped their hands over their mouths. Others whispered prayers. A child began crying softly, clinging to his mother's coat. Father Thomas clutched the edge of a metal barrier, trying desperately to stay upright. "I just need air," he gasped. But his legs gave out. Before he could hit the ground, 3 dogs moved at once. Ranger at his front, Ember at his side, Shadow at his knees, forming a living cushion that slowed his fall. Officers rushed forward to catch him the rest of the way. When his body settled on the floor, the dogs didn't back away. They tightened the circle. Duke hovered above his legs, nose pressing against the priest's shin, sniffing for circulation. Arrow pawed at the ground near the priest's arm, whining a rhythmic cry that matched the rise and fall of Thomas's weakening breath. Ranger placed one paw, gently, decisively, on the priest's shoulder, not pushing, not pinning, just anchoring him to the world. Delgado's voice trembled. "They're not alerting on a threat. They're trying to save him." Paramedics burst into the scene, kneeling fast, unpacking equipment. "What happened?" one asked. Delgado pointed at Ranger, who hadn't moved his paw from the priest's shoulder. "He told us," the officer said, voice cracking. "The dogs knew before any of us did." And as the medical team began their frantic work, one truth became undeniable. The K9s weren't reacting to danger outside the priest's body. They were reacting to the danger inside. The paramedics worked with a speed that matched the panic in the K9's eyes. A young medic named Alvarez dropped to her knees beside Father Thomas. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, and her expression changed instantly. "Pulse is weak, thready," she muttered. "He's crashing." Ranger let out a suppressed whine, lowering his head until his nose nearly touched the priest's cheek, as if confirming Alvarez's words himself. Bolt paced behind her, tail stiff, pupils locked onto the priest's chest like a laser. Another medic, Harris, unbuttoned the top of the priest's cassock to place the EKG pads. The moment she pressed the first pad to his chest, the monitor burst to life with jagged, uneven spikes. Alvarez's voice sharpened into urgency. "He's in early myocardial infarction. This is a heart attack. It could escalate fast." Passengers behind the security rope gasped. Someone whispered, "The dogs! They knew!" Before anyone could respond, the EKG alarm blared, a shrill, piercing sound. Shadow flinched hard, barking once. A lightning-fast reflex to the sudden noise, then pressed closer, nose touching the priest's hand. Ember nuzzled the priest's shoulder with trembling insistence, urging him to stay conscious. Father Thomas blinked slowly, eyes glassy. "I didn't think it was serious," he whispered. Alvarez shook her head, already placing an oxygen mask over his face. "Sir, you were minutes away from collapsing. You're very lucky these dogs reacted." Lucky wasn't the right word. Miraculous came closer. Delgado finally found his voice. "You're telling me they sensed this before he even fell?" Alvarez didn't hesitate. "Yes. Some dogs can detect chemical changes the human body releases during a cardiac event. But reacting this strongly, this early..." She looked at Ranger with an almost reverent awe. "This is extraordinary." Ranger gave a soft huff, lowering his head onto the priest's arm, the most intimate gesture he had ever given outside his handler. Bolt circled once more, then positioned himself at the priest's feet, body tense, ready for command. Shadow stood guard over his right side, ears swiveling to catch every sound. Ember pressed her head into the priest's shoulder, grounding him. It was no longer chaos. It was choreography. Instinctive, protective, ancient. Father Thomas's voice cracked beneath the mask. You sensed this, didn't you, boy?" Ranger blinked slowly. Not confirmation, not denial. Something deeper, understanding. The lead medic straightened. "We need to move him now." But before they lifted the stretcher, Alvarez looked around the circle of trembling, focused dogs. "They didn't alert on a threat," she said softly. "They isolated the victim." And, with those words, the terminal fell into a stunned, breathless silence. As the paramedics prepared the stretcher, the EKG alarm shrieked again. Louder, faster. Alvarez's head jerked toward the monitor. "Oh no, he's progressing. We're losing time." The screen showed it clearly. The sharp peaks were crumbling into uneven, chaotic waves. Father Thomas's heart was struggling, stumbling, like a man running out of breath on a steep hill. Harris leaned closer to the medic team. "He's entering ventricular instability. He's minutes away from a full arrest." Passengers watching from behind the barrier covered their mouths. Some prayed, some cried. All were frozen, and the dogs knew. Shadow let out a low, rhythmic howl, one no handler on duty had ever heard from him. Bolt pressed his chest to the floor as if bracing for impact. Duke stood motionless, trembling with barely contained panic. Then Ranger changed. The calm, disciplined canine that had served for nearly a decade began vibrating with urgency. His breaths turned rapid, shallow. He whined, then barked, once, twice, each bark perfectly timed with the failing rhythm on the monitor. Alvarez looked at him, stunned. "It's like he's tracking the arrhythmia," Delgado finished for her. Father Thomas, though drifting in and out, heard their voices, as if from far away. He tried to lift a hand, but it fell uselessly against the stretcher. "I never thought I'd die in an airport," he whispered weakly. Ember nudged her head beneath his limp hand, lifting it gently against her fur, a gesture so tender that even hardened TSA officers swallowed hard. Alvarez leaned over him. "Father, the blockage in your artery is severe. One of the main pathways to your heart is almost completely sealed. If these dogs hadn't alerted us," she paused, "you wouldn't have made it to your flight." A hush fell. The weight of those words sank into the room like cold water. A journalist standing nearby whispered to a colleague, "They didn't detect danger. They detected death." Meanwhile, the dogs continued their synchrony, each one locked into a position around the priest as if guided by an invisible blueprint. Arrow sniffed the air above the priest's mouth, monitoring breath. Duke pressed near his legs, tracking circulation. Bolt's ears flicked constantly, responding to every medical beep. Shadow kept his nose at the priest's wrist, reading pulse through scent. Ember lay close enough to feel the tremors in the priest's body. And Ranger, ever the sentinel, positioned himself at the priest's heart, unmoving. Harris stared at them, shaking his head in disbelief. "In all my years in EMS, I've never seen anything like this." Then, the paramedic captain gave the command, "Go, go, go, get him to the ambulance." As they rushed him toward the exit, the dogs followed at their handlers' sides, not fighting this time. Just watching. Just guarding. Just praying in the only way animals pray. And the miracle was only beginning. Cold air rushed into the terminal as the paramedics pushed the stretcher toward the ambulance bay. The motion made Father Thomas's head loll to one side, his eyelids fluttering like they were too heavy to lift. Ranger followed only a few feet away, tugging hard enough that Delgado had to jog to keep up. The dogs' breaths came sharp and fast, vapor, rising in white puffs into the frigid morning. Bolt, Ember, and the others trailed at their handlers' sides, but each step looked reluctant, as if every instinct in their bodies demanded they stay glued to the priest's side. As the stretcher hit the outdoors, the wind bit hard. Father Thomas shivered violently. Alvarez raised the blanket. "He's losing heat! Blankets! More oxygen!" Bolt barked twice, high and urgent, the same way he'd been trained to alert for a rapid drop in vitals. Alvarez glanced at the monitor, and her eyes widened. "He's going into hypoperfusion. His heart's not pumping enough blood. Move!" The stretcher bounced over the threshold and toward the waiting ambulance. The dogs reacted instantly. Ranger lunging forward, Shadow whining, Ember pacing in tight circles. Even the handlers felt it. The canine unit wasn't just escorting a victim. They were escorting one of their own. Father Thomas's gaze drifted toward Ranger, barely conscious, pupils unfocused, but still searching. Through the haze, he saw the shepherd's amber eyes, and something inside him softened. "You saved me," he whispered through the mask, words slurred, fragile. "Good boy. Such a good boy." Ranger let out a quiet, trembling whine, the kind that sounded almost human. He tried to climb closer, stretching the leash so tightly that Delgado had no choice but to let him come nearer. For one brief, miraculous second, Ranger pressed his forehead to the priest's hand, and Father Thomas's fingers curled, weak but intentional, into the dog's fur. Alvarez watched the moment, breath catching in her chest. "I've never seen anything like this," she murmured. "These dogs didn't just detect the attack. They refused to let him die." The ambulance doors swung open. "Load him up." But even as the paramedics lifted the stretcher, Ranger stayed pressed forward, chest rising and falling with desperate urgency, as if trying to transfer his own strength into the fading man before him. And in that moment, anyone watching knew. This wasn't just medical intervention. It was a rescue led by instinct, loyalty, and a love that defied logic. The ambulance roared away from the terminal, lights splitting the cold morning air into streaks of red and blue. Inside, Alvarez and Harris worked with fierce precision. "BP dropping again. Prepare nitro." "Starting IV. Hang on, Father." Father Thomas drifted in and out of a fog. The world tilted, colors dissolving into white. His chest burned fiercely now, not like a knife, but like a tight, unrelenting fist squeezing from the inside. And yet, something warm clung to his memory. A pair of amber eyes, a soft whine, a paw resting gently on his shoulder. "Ranger," he whispered, barely audible. Back at the airport entrance, the canine handlers tried to hold their dogs at bay. Ranger paced frantically, nose pressed to the trail the stretcher had taken just seconds earlier. Bolt barked after the disappearing ambulance, the sound echoing across the concrete. Shadow stood frozen, trembling, as if sensing an invisible thread stretching between him and the priest. Delgado knelt beside Ranger. "Easy, boy. They've got him. You did everything you could." But Ranger didn't budge. He stared long and hard toward the ambulance bay, head high, chest tight, as if refusing to let the connection break. Meanwhile, inside the speeding ambulance, Harris suddenly shouted, "He's going into full ischemia. We're losing him. Get the paddles." Alvarez's heart pounded. "No, not yet. He can still fight this." She leaned down close to the priest, gripping his hand. "Father Thomas, listen to me. You hold on. You hear me? That dog fought for you. You fight too." The monitor shrieked, stuttering, slipping. Harris reached for the defibrillator, but then a faint movement. Father Thomas's fingers twitched around Alvarez's glove. His lips parted slightly behind the oxygen mask. "Tell the dogs." A pause. "Thank you." Alvarez swallowed hard. "Tell them yourself. We're getting you there." She administered the emergency dose, her hands steady despite the tremor rising in her chest. The medicine surged through his bloodstream like a final lifeline. Seconds stretched. The monitor beeped erratically. Then a stronger spike. Then another. The rhythm steadied just enough. Harris exhaled. "We've got a window. Go, go, go." As the ambulance lunged forward again, Alvarez brushed a hand over the priest's arm. "You're going to make it," she whispered. "Those dogs refuse to lose you, and so will we." Outside the hospital entrance, doctors waited. Inside the ambulance, Father Thomas breathed, weak but alive. And several miles away, Ranger finally sat down, lifted his head to the cold sky, and released a long, trembling howl. A sound of hope. A sound of prayer. 3 days passed before Father Thomas finally opened his eyes to something other than pain. The hospital room was quiet, filled with the soft rhythm of machines and a gentle winter light filtering through the window. The world no longer swirled or trembled. His chest still felt heavy, wrapped in soreness, but his mind was sharp, present. He was alive. Alvarez entered the room just as he attempted to sit up. "Easy, Father," she said with a smile that carried relief he didn't yet understand. "You scared half the airport. And all 6 dogs." Father Thomas blinked slowly. "The dogs. Ranger." His voice rasped. "Are they all right?" Alvarez laughed softly. "They're more than all right. They've been standing guard outside the lobby entrance every day since you came in. And Ranger—" She shook her head, still amazed. "He hasn't stopped trying to come inside." A warmth spread through the priest's chest, softer than pain, deeper than gratitude. "He saved my life," Thomas whispered. "They all did." Alvarez picked up the chart at the foot of the bed. "You had a 98% blockage in your left coronary artery. The Widowmaker, as they call it." She looked directly at him. "Without their alert, you would have gone down inside the terminal, and you wouldn't have gotten back up." The weight of those words settled slowly, like falling snow. Father Thomas exhaled, letting the truth wash over him. His survival hinged on 6 creatures who owed him nothing, yet gave him everything. 6 silent angels. Later that afternoon, the door creaked open. Officer Delgado stepped inside, uniform slightly wrinkled from long shifts, fatigue under his eyes. But he smiled when he saw the priest awake. "Good to see you, Father." "Officer Delgado," Thomas said softly. "I owe you more than words." Delgado shook his head. "You owe them." He hesitated. "They've been waiting." Father Thomas's brow furrowed. "Waiting?" Before he could ask further, a rustle sounded from the hallway, the unmistakable clicking of claws on hospital tile. Then the door opened wider, and Ranger entered. Not pulling, not lunging, just walking, slow, deliberate, almost reverent. His amber eyes found the priest immediately, softening in a way no handler had ever seen. Behind him, Bolt peeked inside, tail wagging tentatively. Ember followed, ears low, whining with gentle affection. Shadow slipped in quietly, pressing close to the wall as if giving space. Duke and Arrow hovered at the threshold, waiting for permission. The room changed. It wasn't a hospital room anymore. It was a sanctuary, warm, living, breathing. Ranger approached the bedside. Father Thomas lifted a trembling hand. The shepherd pressed his forehead into the priest's palm, closing his eyes as if relieved to be reunited. Emotion tightened Thomas's throat. "You knew," he whispered, voice cracking. "Long before I did, you knew." Ranger didn't move. His breathing steadied, his body relaxing for the first time since the airport. The other dogs gathered around, Bolt resting at the foot of the bed, Ember placing her chin gently on the mattress, Shadow nudging closer until his head nestled near the priest's elbow. Delgado watched from the doorway, blinking away moisture. "I've never seen them like this," he said, voice thick. "They treat you like one of their own." Father Thomas smiled, thin, tired, but full of life. "Perhaps," he whispered, "that's exactly what I am." In that moment, the machines kept beeping. The light kept shining. But the only heartbeat that mattered was the one Ranger had fought so fiercely to protect. And finally, it beat strong again. 2 weeks later, winter sunlight spilled over Denver International Airport like a quiet blessing. The glass panels glittered. The morning announcement hummed overhead. Travelers rushed past with coffees and rolling suitcases, unaware that something extraordinary was about to unfold at Gate C4, the very place where 6 dogs had changed the course of a life. The K9 unit lined up at the terminal entrance, handlers straightening uniforms as if preparing for a ceremony. Ranger stood at the front, chest high, tail still, eyes fixed on the sliding doors as if he instinctively knew who was coming. Officer Delgado placed a hand on Ranger's back. "He's been waiting for this moment," he murmured. And then the doors opened. Father Thomas stepped inside slowly, bundled in a warm coat, moving with careful but steady steps. His face held the softness of someone who had seen death up close and been given back to life. Travelers didn't recognize him, but the dogs did. Bolt's ears shot up first. Ember whimpered softly. Shadow's tail began to thump against the floor. Duke nudged Arrow with excitement. But Ranger didn't move at all. He simply stared, long, steady, almost reverent, until Father Thomas whispered, "Hello, heroes." Only then did Ranger step forward, not running, not pulling, just walking, with a slow, deliberate grace, each step filled with recognition. When he reached the priest, Ranger pressed his forehead once again into Thomas's chest, this time against a heart beating strong beneath layers of fabric. Father Thomas cupped Ranger's face with both hands. "I made it," he said softly, "because of you." The terminal quieted, passengers pausing to watch as the entire K9 unit sat around the priest like a circle of guardians. Officers exchanged looks of disbelief. None had ever seen their dogs behave this way toward a civilian. A TSA supervisor approached Father Thomas. "We wanted to honor what happened that day," she said. "If you're able." Thomas nodded, eyes glistening. "I wouldn't be anywhere else." She lifted a small plaque, engraved with simple words. "In gratitude to K9 Unit Echo 7 for recognizing the unseen and protecting the vulnerable." The crowd nearby applauded softly, but the true moment came when Father Thomas knelt, slowly, carefully, and placed a small wooden rosary around Ranger's neck. "This belonged to a parishioner I once comforted during their final hours," he said. "It has traveled far, carried many prayers. Today, it belongs to you, because you answered one." Ranger lowered his head, as though accepting the gift with solemn respect. A beam of winter sun spilled across his fur, turning the beads on the rosary into soft, golden embers. The handlers watched in silence, some with smiles, some with tears, all with awe. Father Thomas rose again, placing a hand on each dog's head in turn. Bolt leaning into his palm, Ember nuzzling his sleeve, Arrow rubbing his cheek against the priest's coat. Shadow pressed close, seeking quiet comfort, while Duke wagged his tail as if unable to contain his joy. When Thomas reached Ranger last, he whispered, "You didn't just save my life. You reminded me that miracles still walk among us." Ranger blinked slowly, breathing a warm, gentle breath against the priest's hand. In that moment, the airport, usually loud, busy, chaotic, felt like a cathedral. Silent, sacred, washed in soft light. Then, as if on cue, all 6 canines sat together, tails aligned, eyes bright. A formation no handler had commanded, but all understood. It was their way of saying, "He's one of us now." And as the winter sun climbed higher, Father Thomas walked out with the handlers, surrounded by 6 loyal guardians who had rewritten the boundary between instinct and miracle. In the end, what happened at that airport wasn't just a medical rescue. It was a reminder, whispered through barks, carried on 4 paws, that sometimes the bravest hearts don't belong to humans at all. Ranger and his team never sought recognition. They didn't wear medals or deliver speeches. They simply listened to an instinct older than fear, stronger than doubt, and deeper than anything we can measure. And because of that instinct, A man who should have died between cold airport tiles walked back into the world with a second chance. Stories like this remind us of something powerful. Heroes come in many forms. Some walk beside us quietly, watching, waiting, until the moment we need them most. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to have you join our journey. Not all angels have wings. Some have fur, courage, and a heartbeat that protects us when we least expect it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every paw print has a story.